I have to present Professor Koray Durak. Please, Koray, allow me to speak in Greek first and then in English. Καλησπέρα. Αυτή εδώ είναι η τελευταία μας παρουσίαση στη σειρά των διαλέξεων του Ευρωπαϊκού Κέντρου Βυζαντινών και Μεταβυζαντινών Μνημείων. Θέλω να πω ότι έχουμε σήμερα τη χαρά να έχουμε προσκεκλημένο τον καθηγητή Koray Durak, καθηγητής από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Βοσπόρου στην Κωνσταντινούπολη. Έχει τελειώσει την διατριβή του στο Χάρβαρντ το 2008. Ασχολείται με εμπόριο, με επαφές μεταξύ Βυζαντίου και αραβικών περιοχών και γενικά τον ενδιαφέρουν πάρα πολύ οι περιοχές της Ανατολικής Μεσογείου κατά τον πρώιμο Βυζαντινό Μεσαίωνα. Τώρα θα μου επιτρέψετε να παρουσιάσω τον κύριο Durak στα αγγλικά. So, Dr. Koray Durak is an associate professor in the Department of History at Boğaziçi University, Istanbul, Turkey. He has been teaching courses on the history of the medieval Mediterranean region, Byzantine history, and Byzantine medicine since 2008. His main areas of research interest include Byzantine Islamic relations, especially the economic side of it, commercial history of Byzantine Constantinople, Byzantine pharmacology, in addition to his lasting interest in the history of Byzantine studies in modern Turkey. Currently, he is working on a project which explores the exchange of materia medica between Byzantium and the Islamic world in the early Middle Ages. Dr. Durak has completed his PhD thesis in 2008 at Harvard University. The dissertation topic is commerce and networks of exchange between the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Near East from the early 9th century to the arrival of the Crusaders. Among his publications, one can list Healing Gifts, the role of diplomatic gift exchange in the movement of materia medica between the Byzantine and Islamic worlds, in the volume Drugs in the Medieval Mediterranean, Pharmacological Exchange across Cultures, Genres, and Languages, 11th to 14th centuries, in the Cambridge University Press, 2023. Also, Traffic Across the Cilician Frontier, Movement of People between Byzantium and the Islamic Near East in the early Middle Ages, in the volume Byzantium and the Arab World, Encounter of Civilizations, editing from Kralidis and Gougiokostas in the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, 2013. Commercial Constantinople in the volume Cambridge Companion to Constantinople, editing by Bassett, Cambridge University Press in 2022, and a monograph named The Odyssey of Byzantine Studies in Turkey, Koç University Press, 2023. Today, Professor Durak will present us the subject Syria, the bridge between the Byzantine and the Islamic worlds in the early medieval period. Professor Durak, the floor is yours.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για αυτή την εισαγωγή. Χαίρετε από την Κωνσταντινούπολη. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω την κυρία Τολού και την κυρία Λεοντσίνη από το Κέντρο Βυζαντινών και Μεταβυζαντινών Μνημείων για την πρόσκληση τους. Είμαι πολύ χαρούμενος που βρίσκομαι στην Ελλάδα παρόλο που είναι online. Θα συνεχίζω, θα επιστρέψω με την παρουσίαση μου στα αγγλικά, αφού τα ελληνικά μου δεν είναι επάρκη.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ για τα ελληνικά.
As you see in this quotation from a late 10th century Persian geography, Hudud al-Alam, this country, Syria, is flourishing, prosperous, with many people. Whatever is produced in the Maghreb, Egypt, Byzantium, and Spain is brought here. The statement raises a number of questions about Byzantine-Islamic relations. What exactly were the routes that connected Syria to Byzantium? What were the commodities mentioned or raised and that were traded on these routes? Were there other types of exchanges other than trade? And was the final destination of the exchanges, whether goods or not, commodities or not, were their destination, final destination, always the capital cities like Constantinople and Baghdad or Cairo? So, and also, were there exchanges at the very local level between just the frontier between Syria and, let's say, Cappadocia, or even interregional connections, let's say, between Pontus and Syria, or Lycia and Syria, and Crete and Syria? So, as you see, my focus in today's presentation will be Syrian frontier with Byzantine Asia Minor. And unlike Trebizond and Antalya, which were obviously very important nodes for the exchanges, Cilicia or northern Syria were seen as like less important locations for the exchanges. Ashter argued that there was no trade at all on the Syrian-Byzantine frontier, land frontier. Haldon and Kennedy take the trade in question to be local, only frontier trade in nature. Farag and Bonner maintain that it is difficult to know the extent of the international trade through the Syrian land frontier. This presentation today aims to show that there were different levels of commerce between the Byzantine and Syrian sides through Cilicia. And this presentation also aims to show that there wasn't only trade, but there were many different types of exchanges, which can be military only, or commercial only, or only. But before doing that, let me introduce the geography of this region, because some of you might not be very familiar. And let me clarify what was meant by Syria in Byzantine and Islamic sources. As you see here, this is a political picture. My presentation covers roughly 9th to 11th century. So you have the Umayyads centered in Syria in the 8th century. You have roughly the same border standing during the 9th century Abbasid Byzantine world. And in the 10th century, which we call the Shiite period, certain Shiite entities will start rising in the 10th century, like the Hamdanids in Syria, Buyids or Buwayhids in today's Iraq, and Fatimids in Egypt, all Shiite elite running mostly Sunni majority Muslims plus many Christians in the Near East. And finally, in the 11th century, you have again mix of Shiite and Sunni dynasties. In the case of Syria, Marwanids to the north, Nuwayrids in the middle, and Mirdasids to the south of Syria, while Fatimids are still reigning in Egypt. Well, of course, as I said, I will talk about Syria and Cilicia. What is Syria in Byzantine Greek? Because it's not that simple, so I'll focus on that. And what is Syria in Arabic? Well, as you see from this image, there were different provinces with their traditional medieval names that you see. And if you focus, by the way, do you see cursor on the screen when I move it? The white cursor, wonderful. As you see, yes. I'm going to focus on Bilad al-Sham. Thank you. Bilad al-Sham, as you see here. And this area, which doesn't have any name, is actually the border area, frontier area that belonged to Bilad al-Sham and Al Jazeera. So when I say Syria, I mean Bilad al-Sham and the northern part of it in Arabic. Bilad al-Sham was actually composed of local regions, which they called Jund, like the Jund of Dimashq, Jund of Homs, Jund of Kinasirin, and Urdun and Palestine. While the northern part of it was composed of two buffer zones, almost like frontier regions. There was the Awasim That is to say, the first buffer zone where there are big cities and commerce, and sometimes, but not always, attacked by the Byzantines. But Al-Togur, as you see here, Al-Togur was the area that was most exposed to the Byzantine border, and that was most attacked by the Byzantines, and that was the most militarized area of the Islamic Bilad al-Sham. And as you see, in the end, Bilad al-Sham covers southern Turkey, today's Syria, today's Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. So Bilad al-Sham, when I say Bilad al-Sham or Greater Syria, when I say Bilad al-Sham or Greater Syria, I mean this picture here that covers roughly 5 countries, 5 modern countries, which was the medieval definition of Syria. So it's bigger than today's Syria. And it doesn't, as I will show, for the Byzantine side, in the Islamic side, in medieval Arabic too, Syria or Syrian didn't mean any specific ethnic group. It's not like Kurds or Armenians. Syrian was somebody from Bilad al-Sham. And Syria had many linguistic groups and religious groups, like the Christians, Muslims, and of course, Jews. What does it mean to be to Syria? As you see here from the Book of the Eparch in the early 10th century, who are these? This place called Syria? It's not very clear, actually, in medieval Byzantine literature. And modern literature, too, couldn't actually or didn't want to define it exactly. For example, in the Book of the Eparch, we see a certain guild, from the Efrati, specifically dealing with the manufactured goods from Syria. Syria's exarchomena estimata, or from Syria, or Sarakeniki clothes coming from Syria. What does it mean? It was interpreted differently by modern authors. While majority of the scholars, modern scholars, understand Syria to refer to Bilad al-Sham, some others think that it refers to the whole Muslim world, whole Islamic-speaking Muslim world. This lack of consensus on the meaning of Syria is not limited to the Book of the Eparch. For example, commenting on the term Syria, which appears in the 42 martyrs, of Amorion, in the Vita of St. Theodora, the Empress, Martha Vinson warns the reader that the martyrs were taken to Syria, according to Vita, but it wasn't Syria, it was Iraq, it was Baghdad. So she warns her reader. But so then where was Syria? Was it Greater Syria? Was it Iraq? Was it the whole Muslim world? I singled out 2 genres, histories, chronicles, and saint lives from the Middle Byzantine period to discover that. So in Byzantine historical works written between the 8th and 10th centuries, Syria refers to more than one location. Nikephoros, the Patriarch of Constantinople, in his short history, Syria denotes an area that lay between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean Sea, because Nikephoros writes, a severe earthquake occurred in Syria in 750, causing enormous damage. Some affirmed they had seen the ground shaking in Mesopotamia, which is near Syria. So according to this expression, Nikephoros defines Syria as Greater Syria, Bilad al-Sham, standing next to Al Jazeera, Mesopotamia. And moreover, the author doesn't subsume the whole Islamic world under the term Syria. For example, speaking of the Arab siege of Constantinople in 717, Nikephoros specifies which Muslim forces arrived from what part of the Umayyad state. He writes, a great Saracen fleet arrived from Egypt, while another came from Africa and another from Syria. So Egypt is different, Africa is different, Syria is, again, in the Middle East. On the other hand, in the very early 9th century, Chronographia of Theophanes, the confessor, where we see that Syria carried 2 meanings. The first meaning corresponded to Bilad al-Sham, Greater Syria, while other regions of the Islamic world were given different designations, like Mesopotamia for Iraq, Persia for Iran, and Egypt for Egypt. At the second level of meaning, Syria in Theophanes referred to the administrative core of the Abbasid Empire. Theophanes wrote that the heads of the Berber rebels of Africa were brought and paraded in Syria in 774. The location of this political show cannot be Syria, it has to be Baghdad, the political center of Abbasids. The so-called Theophanes Continuatus and Genesios attributed, like at Theophanes, two meanings to Syria. In Theophanes Continuatus's usage, Syria first designates Greater Syria. It specifically covers Melitene, Malatya in the north, Cilician Plain in the northwest, Cilicia, and coastal cities of so-called Levant in the west. All of these locations, as you know, are in Bilad al-Sham. Egypt appears twice as a separate entity from Syria. So Syria doesn't mean the whole Muslim world. Secondly, Syria carries a broader meaning that refers to the core areas of the Abbasid Empire. You might ask me, what is this core area? It's basically Syria, today's modern Syria, today's modern Iraq, and today's Western Iran. These were the core areas of the Abbasid center. They could be taxed easier, that could be controlled easier, they could be policed easier. The author, Theophanes Continuatus, defines the city of Baghdad, into which John the Grammarian was sent as an ambassador in 830, as Syria. In Genesios' narrative too, Syria stands twice for the Abbasid center in Baghdad. First as the destination of, again, John the Grammarian in 830 or 829. And secondly, as the destination of the self-exiled Byzantine general Manuel, the general of the Armeniakon team, who escaped to Baghdad. Even though he escaped to Baghdad and remained in Baghdad in, again, around the same time, it was called Syria. So Syria is bigger than, in this case, Bilad al-Sham. It covers the Abbasid center too. Even though the Administrandi Imperio is not a historical work, I'm going to use it because it gives us a lot of interesting information about the etymology or meaning, semantics of this word. The writer of the Administrandi Imperio employs the term Syria as expected to refer to Bilad al-Sham, also to the Abbasid core, that is to say Syria and Iraq and parts of Iran. But this work, the Administrando, modifies the term in such a way that it requires a third meaning. Syria acquires a third meaning, the whole Muslim world. As expected, as you see here, the writer uses terms like en oli Syria or katapazas tas Syrias, which actually refers to the whole Muslim world in the work, if you go and check it. I'm not going to spend my time showing you the evidence. So, in short, leaving aside the modified term, all of Syria or whole Syria, standing for the whole Muslim world, in actually the Administrandi Imperio, the term Syria itself, in the histories of the Middle Byzantine period, carried, as I keep repeating, two meanings. And actually, these two meanings, that is to say, Greater Syria and the center of the Abbasid world, should have been heard by the Muslims, because look at the image. Al-Masudi, a 10th century Muslim writer from the Near East, says that the Romans called their country Armenia, Romania, and they call Asham and Iraq, countries which the Muslims occupy today, Syria. Here we go. Even the Muslims know and say that the Byzantines, the medieval Romans, Kaldelis is like, you know, it's coming back to my mind, medieval Romans actually call it Syria, not only today's Syria or Bilad al-Sham, but again, the Abbasids, larger center. What about the saints, saint lives? In the saint lives, we see that Syria didn't stand for the whole Muslim world. For instance, in the Vita of Cosmas the hymnographer and John of Damascus, written sometime in the 10th and 11th centuries, John converted many people who came from Egypt, Syria, and Persia, so separate. Writers of Vitae made use of the designation Syria in two ways, just like histories. Greater Syria, in the case of St. Yannikios, and at the second level of meaning, Syria corresponded to Syria and Iraq, like Al-Masudi said, and most frequently to the Abbasid capital city of Baghdad. The composer of the Vita of St. Efthymios of Sardis wrote that Efthymios was sent as an envoy to Syria during the reign of Constantine VI. In the later 8th century, it should be Baghdad, not Syria. And I can increase the examples, but I won't because I don't want to keep you here too long. But also in the Vita of Peter of Mount Athos, the term Syria designates Samarra, the northern city north of Baghdad, a capital city for a while of the Abbasids in the mid-9th century. In short, the term Syria in hagiography or in saint lives is specific, had the double meaning. Now I want to focus on the term Syrian. Let me start with the book of the Eparch again. In the section on, again, from the Effrati guild, who bought silk and other fabrics that came from Syria, we find two references to the Syrians, as you read here. Those who, let me read, bring or import commodities from Syria, can stay for 3 months, the sentence continues. And the longer term, the definition is those, not Syrian, but those who live in Syria, those from Syria who stay in Constantinople for more than 10 years. Even though it's not Syrian, it is those people from Syria. But who are they? Is there a specific ethnic affiliation? Is there a specific religious affiliation? Or is it just a geographical term that we should use when I say Syrian? Because in Arabic, it's a regional geographical term. Modern historians translate Syri in Greek in the book of the Eparch generally as simply Syrian to avoid the problem. The religious affiliation of the Syrians in the book of the Eparch has been briefly commented by Stefan Reinhardt and Tahar Mansouri, who raised the possibility of Syrians of the book of the Eparch to be Christian Arabs speakers of Syria, more specifically Jacobite Christians coming to do trade in Constantinople. Stefan Reinhardt defines Syrian merchants of the book of the Eparch as subjects of the Tulunids, a dynasty from Egypt, and he maintains that many among these Syrian merchants were Muslims. So as you see, modern scholars don't want to give a definite answer, and they just raise the possibilities. The examination of the term Syrian shows that the term itself was a very big semantic basket, meaning that depending on the context referred to ethnic groups, religious groups, and sometimes simply referring to people from that region. For example, I'm not going to go through each of these examples, but as you see here, sometimes Syrian referred to the genos, to the stock. I don't use the word race or nation to avoid modernism. It's like cultural community, people, same stock. So as you see here, in his homily to the Luke the Evangelist, Niketas David writes that Tuton Siron menine to genos fassin. So it's a genos. Likewise, Nikiforos Kallistos, in his church history, describes Jacob Bardeus as somebody from whom the Jacobite heresy originated as a Syrian in stock. We hear also the word ethnos for Syrians, but very infrequently in Byzantine, Middle Byzantine literature. In Gregory of Nyssa's encomium on Saint Stephan from earlier period, Syrians are described among ethni who embraced Christianity. And of course, you're going to say I'm sure you know, there are countless references to the Syrian language, Syriac, in Byzantine literature. like Syriac glotton, but I'm keeping it aside. It's not obviously Arabic. It is Syriac. Language itself is different. It's different. I'm now focusing in these 5 minutes on the people and its name. There are cases where Syrians in Byzantine writing are Syrians in communion with the Constantinopolitan Patriarchal Church, I mean Orthodox Church, as you see in the Vita of Leontios and in the letter of Germanos to the Cypriots. I'm not going to read the originals. The term Syrian occasionally represented Christians not in communion with those in Constantinople. In the case of the Emperor Constantine V invading Germanicaea in 745, he transferred Syrians to Thrace. And the Syrians, Theophanes the Confessor adds, they are Monophysite heretics. So Syrians as Monophysite heretics. In Theorianos' 12th century dialogue with an historian patriarch of Armenia, we read that the patriarch saying, we and the Syrians differ from you about the nature of Christ. So an historian, and a Jacobite, or if I may say, Syriac Orthodox, different from the Byzantine Roman Orthodox. And finally, in some Byzantine literature cases, interestingly, Syrian meant Muslim too, especially in Byzantine histories. In the war for the Abbasid throne in 745, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, one of the contendants, says Theophanes, Abu Ja'far was hostile to the Persians and friendly to the Syrians who supported him. So the Syrians must be Muslim Syrians supporting Abu Ja'far for his fight for the throne. On another occasion, Theophanes, well, I'm not going to say increase the examples. Moving on in time, Michael Psellos describes the enemies of Romanos III attacking Syria as Syrians. Obviously, you know, Byzantines being attacked by Syrians, these Syrians have to be Muslim Syrians. And in the 11th century can be, you know, Syrians, Muslim Syrians from Aleppo, Mirdasids or Nuwairids or others. They're actually Mirdasids, apparently. I took a note. Similarly, Anna Komnena says that the governor of Smyrna in the 11th century was stabbed by a Saracen, and that Saracen was a Syrian. In the end, let me finish this section. Syria seems to be anybody coming from Syria, whose ethnic and religious affiliation was provided directly with the addition of certain words in the works, or was alluded indirectly in the context, from the context you understand. However, when there is no allusion, no contextualization in the Byzantine, mostly histories, for further specific meaning, we have to just simply say Syria stood for a region, if there is no additional information to go further. Taking you away from the horrific and chilling reality of the contemporary Syrian and Palestinian questions and the horrible hypocrisy of the so-called developed democratic world, I would like to proceed to the second part of my presentation, away from the Syria and Syrians. And I want to focus now on the various phases of the Byzantine Near Eastern encounters in the micro example of Northern Syria and its connection to Asia Minor. Well, as you see, Northern Syria and Awasim here, and Tugur, the real their frontier area here, corresponded to Cilicia. And Cilicia was divided into mountainous Cilicia, as you see, defined by Taurus Mountains, and Cilician Plains, which is actually today one of the biggest and most prosperous regions, agricultural regions of Turkey, producing huge amounts of cotton in Turkey. The Adana Plain, Cilician Plain in Turkey, very populous and rich. And as you see here, there were many routes connecting northern Syria to Asia Minor, specifically Cappadocia and Lycia and interior of Asia Minor. The overland route, as you see, passed, number one, through a northern route connecting Marash, Germanicaea, to Caesarea through Al-Haddad Pass, because you have to go through passes, mountain passes, to reach Zamandos and then Cappadocia. The second route connected Tarsus to, again, through Cilician gates, Pili, through Podondas, to either Konya, Iconion, or Caesarea. There is also another route going west, but diversifying in Cilicia through the mountains, through Claudiopolis into the plains, or there was a very simple coastal road going all the way to, even though a bit rough, to Antalya. Actually, these routes are collected, everybody collects from Islamic geographies of the period. So Islamic geographers of the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries mention these routes, like Ibn Khordadbeh, like Ibn Hawqal, and Al-Ajlisi from a later period. A major type of exchange that resulted because of the encounter between the two worlds was captives captivated by the enemy forces. Some captives were made into slaves, while others were kept as prisoners, and while others were killed. The Abbasid geographer Ibn Khordadbeh from the 9th century refers to raids between the Byzantines and the Muslims in Cilicia, in northern Syria, mentioning female slaves, Byzantine Roman slaves, female slaves being carried on the back of the camels, descending from the mountains of Taurus to the Cilician plains to be sold in the slave markets, unfortunately for the modern mind, my modern mind. And actually, Tarsus and Aleppo were two major Islamic cities where Byzantine prisoners and captives were kept for sale or for return, while Iconion and Constantinople were two major Byzantine centers where Islamic captives were kept for a while to be returned to the Islamic world or to be sold in Byzantium. The Amir of Tarsus, Abu Thabit, he fell prey to the Byzantines in a raid in 900. He was carried from the Taurus border to Constantinople through Konya, following the Cilician route. So as you see, these routes were used to carry captives to the enemy territory. Routes were also used by deserters, escapees, renegades. I can increase the name of the terms in English. Wasif, a eunuch of the governor of Azerbaijan, he escaped from Azerbaijan, seeking refuge in Byzantium in 900. And he was captured by the Muslim forces exactly while he was trying to escape through Anazarbos and Cilician passes. So from Cilician plain through the Cilician gates into Romania. Similarly, Manuel, the strategos of Anatolikon team, escaped to the Islamic world through the Syrian passes, that is to say Cilician passes, to Baghdad in 830. These routes were also used by diplomats, but I'm not going to give you examples. I'm just going to repeat Yannis Dimitroukas's modern work in German on the Byzantine-Islamic relations. There you can find many examples where these routes that you see on the screen were used by diplomats from both sides. But let me focus on one thing. Prisoner exchange, something that I wrote on, and I like to spend another 7 minutes or so, because this is a very interesting topic. I said a few minutes ago that some captives were sold as slaves in the receiving countries, but some of them were kept in the prisons to be sold back or to be returned back because you want your own people to take back. So prisoner exchange or captive exchange. This is the location. Again, this is the location, that is to say somewhere here, if you look at my cursor, west of Silifke or around Silifke, Seleukia, on the Lamos River in Greek, and in Turkish, Lamassu or Limonlu Çay, brook of the lemon. You see, I think it's one of these. I cannot pinpoint which one. This one. Yeah, this one. So between Silifke and Mersin. It's a small brook. There were official ceremonial exchanges between the Byzantine state and the Abbasid state in the 9th and 10th centuries. There were 12 major ones, 6 minor ones, exchanges of prisoners. We can follow these in the Greek and especially is Arabic sources from the 8th to 10th centuries. Lamassu formed a natural division between the plain of Cilicia and mountains of Taurus. And it's most likely that exchanges took place close to the water, to the sea, Erdemli town today, because Al-Istakhri and Ibn Hawqal say that Byzantines came mostly to the exchange point by boats. So imagine the Romans coming, maybe sometimes from the mountains, but mostly by boat to exchange prisoners, while the Muslims came mostly by foot from the plain of Cilicia to meet around today's Erdemli, the Lamassu. Preparations for the exchange would start with emissaries sent to Constantinople and Baghdad or to the regions to collect the information about which prisoners to receive back, how many of them, which ones to take, etc. So there is a preparation period. So a Byzantine official comes to Abbasid territories, and Abbasid official comes to Byzantine territories, and they are given, of course, permission, and a truce is established, no fighting. It will be signed, so to make sure that preparations are done, and then exchange would take place. Usually exchanges in Lamassu would last either 4 days, shortest, or 19 days, longest. Let me continue. Exchanges at Lamassu or Lamos consisted of a number of performances that helped the Byzantines and Abbasids to present themselves to the world, to themselves and to the world. For example, authorities on both sides preferred ransoming at Lamas rather than other places. So they're creating a theater, a stage. Periodic exchanges rather than random or individual exchanges. For example, Abu Firas, the governor of Manbij in Syria, was a prisoner in the hands of the Byzantines. He wrote a letter to Saif ad-Dawla, the Hamdanid ruler, saying, please save me from the Byzantines. But Saif ad-Dawla replied, saying that exchange had to be general. Abu Firas had to wait for the official exchange time. So like saving one person was not preferred. You have to wait for the exchange, periodic exchange. And of course, these exchanges were presented a microcosmos of the greater Byzantine and Islamic world. The prisoners from both sides came from different political, social, even religious backgrounds. Al-Masudi writes that not only soldiers, but actually more than soldiers, civilians were captured, so therefore they were to be exchanged. Not only men, but women were ransomed. There were many women among them. Not only Muslims, but Christians of the Near East were to be taken from the hands of the Byzantines. So don't forget, the Muslim authorities wanted to take not only their Muslim subjects from the hands of the Byzantines, but their Christian subjects from the hands of the Byzantines. And for example, in the exchange of 846, the Byzantines refused to accept old men, women, and young children from the Muslim side, because Byzantines claimed that the Muslim captives that they had were all soldiers. So there is a stock market. I mean, if I have all adult soldiers as captive, and if you have only old women and men, I won't change it. I won't exchange it. It's almost like economy. And also, let me just give you two quotations. One from Al-Masudi. Everybody would come to watch it. That's why I call it a stage. As you read, the inhabitants of the frontier from cities and provinces came to this ransom. Their number was 500,000 people, obviously exaggeration. All dressed, all mounted, armed with all possible luxury. So you see Muslims or Muslim authorities are trying to show themselves as we're rich, we are strong, we are luxurious, Hey, Byzantines, what are you? The West Plain could not contain them. The Romans arrived there on their ships, splendidly decorated. But the Byzantines are trying to also show off. And as you see here, finally, Al-Tabari is a long quotation, but I want to show it because this stage is a confrontation of religions. According to Al-Tabari, I'm reading, Muhammad ibn Abdullah continued. When they were assembled for the prisoner exchange, the Muslims stood on the east side of the river, the Byzantines on the west side of the river. The river was fordable. Each party would send forth a man, and the two would meet in the middle of the river. When a Muslim reached the Muslims, he would say, Allahu Akbar, God is greatest. When the Byzantines reached when the Byzantine captive reached the Byzantines, they said something in their language equivalent to God is greatest. I don't know. Maybe you can make a guess. Kyrie eleison, or I don't know. Like,
Δόξα τω Θεώ.
What is it?
Δόξα τω Θεώ.
Oh, Doxa Teo. Doxa Teo. Yeah. Possible, very possible. Thank you. It is reported on the authority of Al-Sindi, the client of Hussein al-Hadim, the Muslims and Byzantines build bridges over the river. We would send a Byzantine over our bridge, a Byzantine would send a Muslim over. Actually, just let you know, in the 12th century, this scene was repeated between the Byzantines and the Turks. In today's roughly Fethiye, like Muğla region, there was it was a border between like the 12th or 13th century, I'm not sure, between the Byzantines and the Seljuks. And there they would establish temporary bridges and they would exchange prisoners. So anyway, as you see, this is a stage, this is an ideological game. Anyway, let me move on to the final section of my presentation because I'm just checking out my time. Yeah, I should finish in 10 minutes, otherwise you'll get bored.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, 10 more minutes. This is the most, I guess, original, or if not original, the most, for me, exciting part of the presentation, the commerce, because I'm interested in commerce. The presence of the funduk, caravanserais, hostelries, merchant houses, whatever you want to call them. Actually, the Arabic word funduk is originating from pandochion, all receiving inns. There are many references in the Islamic sources. I went through them and I counted them, but I'm not going to go through one each of them. But there was an inn close to Germanicaya. There was another inn, hostelry, close to Zamandos. There was an inn on the Cilician Gate, and there were 2 or 3 around Tarsus and Mopsuestia. Actually, Ibn al-Adim, a later Islamic historian, when he is describing northern Syria and Cilicia, he calls the whole region, quote, the land of fanatic. That is to say, a land of caravanserais. For the 10th century. Ibn al-Adim is writing later, but he's writing about the 10th century. Also, let me remind you that Komerkiarios seals from Seleucia shows that there was taxation of the commodities. What about merchants? Occasional references in the sources, Arabic or Greek, testify to the presence of merchants conducting regional or interregional trade on the North Syrian Cilician border. The military manual of Nikephoros Phokas, Develitazione, so-called Develitazione, from 1960s, and the Tactica of Nikephoros Uranos from late 10th century. Okay. They write, these two writers of military tactica, they say that Byzantine military officials should send merchants to other side of the border to find out about the plans and intentions of the enemy. And likewise, these generals warn their own generals, that Muslims do the same. Muslims secretly arrive in Byzantine towns to procure necessities for their own towns. So even during the time of war, or in preparation to war, there are merchants, maybe spies disguised as merchants, or simply merchants crisscrossing the border. In addition to the movement at the regional level, or at the, local level, just border, you have an example from more like a distant areas. Ibn Shaddad from 13th century, in his history, talks about the topography of Syria and Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is northern Iraq, by the way. And he refers to 10th century, mid-10th century anecdote. According to this mid-10th century anecdote, a Byzantine domesticos from Cappadocia it's a bit complex, listen to be careful. A Byzantine domesticos from Cappadocia in the mid-10th century contacted a Christian perfume merchant, Brepsos maybe, from Aleppo, a Christian from Aleppo, to have his captive son killed. So apparently this Byzantine domesticos from Cappadocia doesn't want his son to be captive forever, so he prefers his son to be killed rather than being captive in the hands of the Muslims. This is an anecdote. This might be a story, not really not real story, but it's a believable story for the reader. What is interesting is a Byzantine domesticos is contacting secretly a Christian perfume merchant from Aleppo. You cannot contact a merchant unless you have a prior connection. So I'm sure you agree with me, this is an anecdote that shows there was some kind of trade between Cappadocia and Aleppo about perfume and spices or whatever, aromata. Arabic sources also present a number of ascetics, Muslim dervishes, conducting jihad against Byzantium. So these are mujahideen, jihadist warriors, let's say, living in the Tugur in the 10th century, fighting against Romans. But actually, look at this. In the mountains of the Byzantines, there is a tree called Shars tree. Boats are made from this. The Abdal of Tarsus, in this case, the Muslim warriors of Tarsus, cause these trees to fall and transport them towards the Mediterranean coast during truce. So when Byzantines and Muslims are fighting, when there is truce, the Muslim warriors, soldiers go up enter the Byzantine territory, cut the trees, and push them to the sea and sell them, or send and sell them, probably to Egypt and southern Syria, where there is no much timber. And also, Bonner studied these warriors living in Tarsus and Cassalicia, and many of these warriors were part-time warriors. They were also carpenters, lumber merchant, cloth merchant, cotton merchant, and a tajir, that is to say, long-distance trader. Not like a merchant, small merchant, but long-distance. Tajir in Arabic is like a professional trader, not like part-time trader. So you see, I keep referring to the fact that war and commerce coexisted, merchant and warrior sometimes mixed. Finally, commodities traded. What did the Byzantines export to the Syrian markets? Local trade was a reality. Nikephoros Uranos, in his Tactica, complained that local Byzantines, local Romans, along the eastern border, and he refers to Syrian border definitely because he was a general of Antioch in later times, they sold flocks, as you see in the screen, cheese, grain, and foodstuff to the Muslim towns on the Syrian border, while these towns were besieged by the Byzantine forces. Some Byzantine exports originating from the areas close to the border found customers in the Islamic markets far away from the border. Like this one, as I said, the timber cut in the Taurus Mountains right on the border was sent to, most likely, it doesn't say to Egypt and southern Syria, but most likely to the markets of the south. If you are not convinced by that, let me say storax, talk about storax. The resin of a tree called Styrax officinale was another local product, regional product of Cilicia and Pamphylia in the mountains. And many references actually were made in the Islamic sources, geographies, that this region is the source of storax. People Romans collect the storax, and they export it to the Muslims. It was maya in Arabic. And these Arabic sources say that these storax commodities were sold to everywhere, not Syria. And if you look at the Islamic or Arabic medical sources, there are constant references to Rumi storax, Roman storax. So Islamic Arabic medicinal sources confirm it. It's confirmed the presence of storax in the markets of the Islamic world. Textiles from Seleucia, Silifke, can be listed among the Byzantine exports, as you see here. Silifke is here, so I've just put the box here. Because Al-Bakri, an 11th century geographical dictionary writer, when he talks about Byzantine Seleucia, he says that Byzantine Seleucia has Thiyab Seleucia, textiles, Seleucian textiles, and it has Durak. Durak actually are looser outer garments with sleeves. They must be exported again from either Seleucia or from Byzantium in general, or everywhere in the world, because Al-Isfahani says that Durak is a Roman product. So Al-Isfahani doesn't refer to a border. He just writes in his general work that, Romans have so many products, one of which is Durak. So obviously Durak was brought to many markets around the Islamic world. And finally, close to Seleucia, on the other side of the frontier, Islamic Tarsus was one of the relay points of two commodities. Relay points to take to Islamic markets in the south. Dogs and falcons, two entities for hunting. Ibn al-Adim from Aleppo, alluding to the period from before 960s, he writes that Tarsus used to import dogs from the land of Seleucia. So dogs coming from Silifke area, from the Roman world, whether from the region or from far away. And also, actually, referring to the same author says that falcons are brought again from the Roman world through Tarsus into Islamic world. Where could the falcons can come? I went through the sources of the early and middle medieval period, and most of the falcons that the Muslims bought from the Byzantines came either from the Taurus Mountains or mostly from the Pontic Mountains and Black Sea and Caucasia. So the falcons that the Byzantines sold came either from here, from the north of Asia Minor, and partly from the south of Asia Minor. But the most inter-regional item is mastic. As Islamic sources say, mastic is the quintessential product of Chios, Al-Biruni, and many others, Ibn Sina, Avicenna, they say it. Mastic is a Roman product coming from the island of Chios. But what is interesting is this. Al-Biruni writes this. Mastic is imported through Al Jazeera, through Armenia, and through Syria, Syrian Tugur actually, to our world. So you see, mastic enters the Islamic world from Asia Minor through Armenia, through Al Jazeera, and Syrian Tugur. 3 points. How complicated can it be? How more complicated can this trade be? The list of the Islamic exports, that is to say, the list of Byzantine imports from the Islamic world is through Cilicia is much shorter because of the nature of the sources. Unfortunately, Arabic writers were more interested in what was coming to the Near East than what was going to Byzantium. Plus, unfortunately, again, Greek sources don't talk about commerce most of the time, as you know. So, but still, the Book of the Park, which saves us a lot about these subjects, refers to robes and silk, estimata, and hareria from Seleucia, so robes and silk coming from the east, entering Byzantium, Roman land, through Cilicia and Seleucia. And also, the same book of the epoch says, spices come mostly from Trebizond, but it also comes from Syria. So I include spices, perfumes, and dyes among the items that entered Roman world from Syria. And remember about the Byzantine domesticos and his secret friend, Aleppon perfumer. In short, it is possible to conclude that Arabic and Greek sources examined in this paper that Byzantine exports in the 9th and 10th century via Cilician Syrian routes consisted of animals, forest plants like storax, timber, mastic, textiles, and possibly metals, because Taurus Mountains is a huge metallurgic source, while the same routes were used to import into Byzantium textile again and aromata. And actually, if you notice, most of these commodities through Syria, exported and imported through Syria, were easily portable items, light in weight, but great in value, such as storax, mastic, perfume, silk. So transportation cost is minimized. Animals can carry themselves, timber can be rolled. Moreover, some items like perfume, storax, mastic, falcons were traded because the receiving party didn't have them. The Rome Byzantines, I mean, the southern Muslims didn't have falcons or mastic. They had to take it, buy it from the Muslims, from the Byzantines, sorry. So the picture we get show that the trade was not limited to Constantinople and Baghdad. That's an old school thought. As I tried to show, regions, inter-regions, even distant regions, as well as very local areas participated in the trade between them. And to finish, the fact that there was constant military confrontation between the Islamic forces and Byzantine forces did not preclude existence of commerce. There were periods of peace in which commerce could be conducted, and there, even during the war period, trade was conducted. As the case of the timber rolling abdals and mujahideen show, mujahideen could be traders when the time was ripe. The Byzantine Islamic frontier was a place of both raid and trade. And the best example comes from this quotation, again from Hudud al-Alam, to finish. Kalikala, Theodosiopolis in today's eastern Turkey, Erzurum, a town inside of which there is a strong fortress where there are mujahideen for the faith. By turn, from each place, they come from everywhere to Kalikala to fight against the Romans. Merchants too are numerous in it. As you see, Kalikala was also a frontier, Muslim frontier town of fighting, but it was also a commercial center. Just say, the list I gave you is only a list of commodities specific to northern Syria and Cilicia. There are zillions of other commodities exchanged between the two worlds through other borders, and also references without, or examples without any reference to a place, to a location, just the Muslim sources saying Byzantines have great textile, great carpets, cushions, and birds. There is no reference to a space, but specific space, place, but just Byzantines. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't bore you or kept you here too long.
Thank you very much, Professor Durak, dear Koray. Thank you very much for your very, very interesting presentation.